Welcome to the Inner Mind of Sport with EMIL STEINAR. The mission with this podcast shows is that I can help you throughout the day if you're in sport, strength training or outside sport like walking, running or cycling outside. My main mission is that this podcast shows can help you throughout your day, that you are happy and have a positive mind, but not that you are sad and think you are a loser or nobody or do nothing. That's not true. Everyone is different. Also, the mission with this shows is that I can get to you and you can get to me. So, hereafter, we are going to have a lot of fun and enjoy the show together with the show that is coming on now. Hopefully you will enjoy the show and have fun, listen to it like I will. So let's get into the show and I will see you after. Here are the sport that tells us which disability classes each person is in. These are summer sport. If talking about swimming, then here is the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes S1 to S10, SP1 to SP9, SM1 to SM10, physical impairments. There are 10 different sport classes for athletes with physical impairment. Numbers 1 to 10. Athletes with different impairments competed against each other. Because sport classes are allocated based on the impact that impairment has on swimming, rather than on the impairment itself. To evaluate the impact of impairments on swimming, classifiers assess all functional body structures using a point system and ask the athlete to complete a water assignment. The total number of points then determines the athlete's S and SP sport classes. Due to the different demand on S and SP events, swimmers are often allocated different S and SP sport classes. The SM sport class is calculated from the S and SP sport class. Sport class S1, SP1, SM1. Physical impairment. S1 is for swimmers that with highly affected coordination of the torso, arms and legs. SP1 is for breaststroke swimmers with highly affected coordination of the torso, arms and legs. SM1 is for medley swimmers with highly affected coordination of the torso, arms and legs. Sport classes S2, SP2 and SM2. Physical impairments. S2 is for swimmers with severely reduced coordination in the body, legs and hands, and who have low arm strength. These swimmers swim through the water using power generated
mainly by using their forearms and shoulders. SB2 is for breaststrokes with severely impairment coordination in the body, legs and hands, and a slight impairments of the arm, or for those with a similar impairments but have a moderate impairment of the arm. These swimmers swim through the water using power generated mainly by using their forearms and shoulders. SM2 is for medaling swimmers with severely reduced torso, legs and hand coordination and low arm strength. These swimmers swim through the water using power generated mainly by using their forearms and shoulders. Sport classes S3, SP3 and SM3. Physical impairments. They need to have an assistant with them to help them get in and out of the pool. They start in the pool and need help with the start. It's because an assistant need to be able to hold their hands at the start. They can also start lying on the back and then an assistant holds their feet against the touchpad sensor. S3 is for swimmers with coordination affected to a low degree in the upper torso and arms, with the rest of the torso and legs highly affected and those with a low overall impairment, plus the absence of limbs. These swimmers maintain a good body position solidly using their arms and upper body. SP3 is for breaststroke swimmers with coordination affected to the low degree in their upper torso and arm, with the rest of the torso and legs highly affected, and those with the absence of limbs. These swimmers maintain a good body position solidly using their arms and upper body, most with breaststroke alternately to keep their head low and bring their hips closer to the surface. Swimmers must show intent to move symmetrically even if their arms and legs are not of even length. SM3 is for medaling swimmers with coordination affected to a low degree in the upper torso and arms, with the rest of the torso and legs highly affected and those with absence of limbs. These swimmers maintain a good body position solidly using their arms and upper body. Sport class S4, SP4 and SM4. Physical impairment. S4 is for swimmers with high body and leg movements, which also affect the hands or where limbs are absent. These swimmers generate the majority of their power from their shoulders. SP4 is for breaststroke swimmers with moderately impaired coordination in their whole body or a large amount in the torso and legs. These swimmers have difficulty maintaining a good posture or swimming straight and maintaining balance while swimming through the water. SM4 is for middling swimmers with severely reduced the body and leg mobility, which also affect the hands and or where limbs are absent. These swimmers generate the majority of their power from their shoulders. They use an alternately breathing pattern to maintain their body position high in the water and turn mostly with their arms with little or no kick from the wall coming from their legs. Sport classes S5, SP5 and SM5. Physical impairment. S5 is for swimmers with moderately impaired coordination, mid-body and leg movements, or where limbs are absent. These swimmers have difficulty holding a good body position or swimming straight through the water. SP5 is for breaststrokers with high mobility in the lower body and legs, those with dwarfism or those with no limbs. These swimmers find it difficult to maintain a consistent swimming speed because of the way power is designed to exchange arm power and leg power in their breaststrokes. SM5 is for medley swimmers with moderately impaired coordination, mid-body and leg movements, or absent limbs. These swimmers have difficulty holding a good body position or swimming straight through the water. Cerebral palsy, or CP. S5, SP4, SP5, SM5. Sport classes S6, SP5, SM6. Cerebral palsy, or CP, and dwarfism. They can start in the pool if they intend to dive into the pool from standing position. The assistant can support them on the starting platform or hold with them during the starting. They should have an assistant with them to help them get in and out of the pool. In breaststroke, they swim with their hands and the feet can make a small wave, flying feet. Sport classes S6, SP6 and SM6. Physical impairment. The S6 is for swimmers with moderately impaired coordination on one side, which has a strong impact on the lower body and legs. Those with dwarfism or those without a limbs. These swimmers have difficulty holding good body positions or swim straight through the water. SP6 is for breaststrokers with moderately impaired coordination on one side, which has a strong impact on the lower body and legs. Those with dwarfism or those without limbs. These swimmers have less power and strong balance in their hands. Dwarfs have better balance but are greatly affected to the greater extent with their ability to transmit power into the water due to the length of their limbs and greater resistance. All have difficulty maintaining a good body position. SM6 is for middling swimmers with moderately impaired coordination on one side have very severely lower body and legs impairments, those with dwarfism or missing limbs. These swimmers have difficulty holding a good body position or swimming straight through the water. Sport classes S7, SP7 and SM7. Physical impairment. S7 is for swimmers with low to moderate arms, torso and leg mobility, with impairments on one side of the body, those with dwarfism and those with no limbs. All of these swimmers need to work hard on timing their strokes and achieving good strokes in the water. SP7 is for breaststrokers with low to moderate strength in arms, torso and legs, with impairments on one side of the body, those with dwarfism or those with no limbs. All of these swimmers need to work hard on timing their strokes or achieving good strokes in their water. SM7 is for swimmers with movements that affects low to moderate strength in the arms, body and legs, moderated impairments down one side of the torso, those with dwarfism or those without limbs. All of these swimmers need to work hard on timing the strokes and achieving good strokes in the water. Sport classes S8, SP8, SM8. Physical impairment. S8 is for swimmers with low coordination, moderate leg movement, using one arm or without limbs. Swimmers in this class have almost full capacity, but lack of all-round muscle power. SP8 is for breaststrokers with low coordination, using only one leg or only use one arm, or the partial absence of one limb. Partial absence of one arm. SM8 is for middling swimmers with coordination affected to a low-level movement, moderately affected in the legs, use only one arm or the absence of limbs. Swimmers in this class have almost full capacity but lack all-around muscle power. Sport classes S9, SP9, SM9. Physical impairment. S9 is for swimmers with impaired arm and leg coordination, high degree of weakness in one leg or the absence of limbs. These swimmers have difficulty applying their power evenly in the water, especially at high speed. SP9 is for breaststroke swimmers with impaired coordination of low strength in the legs, moderately impaired movements in the hips joint or legs, very severely impairment in one leg or not with a limb. These swimmers can also maintain a good body position. They have a correct minor instability within their stroke pattern, but their start and turns are almost unaffected. SM9 is for middling swimmers with impaired coordination in their arms and legs, severely impairment in one leg or absence of limbs. These swimmers have difficulty applying their power evenly in the water, especially at high speed. Sport classes S10, SP10, SM10. Physical impairment. S10 is for swimmers with movement effect at a low level in the legs, moderately in the hip joint or feet, to a high degree in one foot or minor limbs absence. These swimmers have to correct minor instability within the stroke pattern. SM10 is for middling swimmers with movement effect at a low level in the legs, moderately in the hip joint or feet, to a high degree in one foot or minor limbs absence. These swimmers have to correct minor instability within their stroke path. Sport classes S11, SP11, SM11. Vision impairment. S11, SP11, SM11 is for swimmers with near total visual impairment. Everyone swims with black swimming goggles, which are suitable for blind and visually impaired swimmers. Head tappers and stroke counting are used to perform the turns accurately. Sport classes S11, SP11, SM11, visual impairment. Athletes with a vision impairment competed in 3 sport classes, from SP11 to SP13. SP11, these athletes have a very low visual acuity and or no light percention. These are no exceptions to swimming rules. The same rules as World Aquatics, but they need to have 2 tappers to tap at each turn and at the end of the swim. Note that you can now hit 2 times. That is for the person does not hit the first time. There is also an exception if a swimmer kicks into the wrong lane. Sport classes S12, SP12, SM12. Vision impairment. S12, SP12, SM12 is for visually impaired swimmers. They have a restricted field to view and some cannot see the black line on the bottom of the pool. They can see the end of the line from 1 meter away. As SP12, athletes with a higher visual acuity than athletes competing in the SP11 sport class and or on visual field of less than 5 degrees radius. Sport classes S13, SP13, SM13. Visual impairment. S13, SP13, SM13 is for swimmers with a visual impairment. They peripheral vision is is restricted and or they are able to see the end of the pool at a maximum of 5 meters. As SB13 athletes have the least severe vision impairment eligibly for Paralympic sport. They have the highest visual acuity and or a visual field of at least than 20 degrees radius. In order to ensure a fair competition, athletes in the SB11 sport class are required to wear blackened goggles. To assure safety, all SB11 swimmers must use a taper. Swimmers in the SB12 and SB13 sport classes may choose whether or not they wish to use one. There are no exceptions to the swimming rules, the same rules as World Aquatics. Sport classes S14, SB14, SM14, intellectual impairment. S14, SB14, SM14 is for swimmers who have an intellectual disability. These swimmers have difficulty understanding or applying training techniques and competition strategies. Especially in the busy competitive swimming arena. S14 swimmers have an intellectual impairment which typically lead to the athletes having difficulties with regards to pattern recognition, sequencing, and memory, or having a slow reaction time, which impact on sport performance in general. Moreover, S14 swimmers show a high number of strokes relative to the speed than athletes elite swimmers or elite swimmers there who are not have no disability. Sport classes S15, SB15, SM15, autism and Asperger syndrome. Swimmers with such conditions as autism and Asperger syndrome. These disorders are characterized by difficulties in social interactions and communications and restricted and repetitive repertoire of interest and activity. Sport classes S16, SB16, SM16, Down's syndrome. Intelligently impaired swimmers who have a significant additional impairment of lifelong condition that affects the functional capacity of the individual and substantially impacts of the their sports performance. This includes those with the intelligently disability associated lifelong conditions or a genetic conditional such as Down syndrome. Known exceptions regarding swimmers' rules, except at the start, that is that often as 16 are not allowed to dive into the pool from standing position. Sport classes as 15 depth in Australia. Swimmers have hearing lost. This can lead to difficulty hearing the starter during races. Slower reaction times or impaired balance, which affect performance in the sport general. Sport class S20 SB 20 SM20 swimmers in particular classes. The classes for who are not yet have their sport classes found from classifier, the people that say which sports class you're in. Swimmers previously classified it in the S1 to S16 classification range who have one or more of the above impairments and are currently ineligible or having a potentially to be allegedly in their future. If talking about track and field, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Track and jumping. T stands for running events and jumping events in parasport. Running and jumping, 20 classes. Sport classes. Impairment types. T11 to T13. Athletes in this classification have varying levels of visual impairment. T20 athletes having an intellectual impairment. T and F31 to T and F38 athletes with cerebral palsy. T32 to T34. These athletes compete in wheelchair racing events. T35 to T38. These athletes compete in running events. T40 to T41. Athletes with less or stress, including short stature. T42 to T44. Athletes with impairment in one or both legs, often requiring a prosthetic leg or limb. Also includes athletes with impaired muscle power, impaired range of movement or leg length difference. T45 to T45 to T47 athletes with impairment in one or both arms. T51 to T54 wheelchair athletes. T51 to T52 having impairment in upper or lower limbs. T53 having fully functioning arms. T53 having fully functioning arms but no trunk function. function, and T54 having partial trunk and leg functions. T61 to 64 lower limbs competing with prosthesis affected by limb deficiency and leg length difference. Throws. F stands for throwing events in parasports. T and F 31 to 38 athletes with cerebral palsy. F 31 to F 34 these athletes competed in a sitting position or in a throwing chair. F 35 to F 38 these athletes compete in standing events. F 51 to F 58 wheelchair field athletes. F 51 to F 53 have limited function in shoulders, arms and hand and no trunk or leg function. F 54 having normal arm and hands function. F 55 and F 58 having increasing levels of trunk and leg function. Wheelchair racing. 7 classes. T32 to T34. These athletes compete in wheelchair racing events. T51 to T54 wheelchair athletes. T51 to T52 having impairment in upper and lower limbs. T53 having fully functioning arms but no trunk function, and T54 having partial trunk and leg functions. Racing running 3 classes. Sport classes RR1, RR2, RR3. Athletes with severe coordination impairment, hypertonia, ataxia, athetosis, competing in racing running events in sport class RR1, RR2, RR3, athletes with cerebral palsy. If talking about para-archery, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Para-archery is split into 2 classes, open and W1. Open classes contains both standing athletes and those in a wheelchair. Archers position themselves at a 90 degrees angle to the target and may use body support. W1 athletes may use either both limited to 45 lips in draw weights and without the using of the magnifying glass at the mark point. That means that they don't have to use magnifiers on the bow to aim it at the target like they do with the open class. If talking about para-badminton, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes WH1 wheelchairs severe impairment, WH2 wheelchair minor impairment, SL3 standing lower limbs impairment severe, SL4 standing lower limbs impairments minor, SL5 SU5 standing upper limbs impairment. SH6 standing short stature. If talking about blind football, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Athletes who compete in blind football have a very low visual acuity and or no light perception, fully blind or nearly fully blind. To ensure fair competition, all players except for the goalkeeper must wear eye shades. Eye shades is like a blindfolder. This classification applies to the visual impaired field players. To addition, each team has a sighted abilities goalkeeper or no disability goalkeeper or player who does not need to undergo classification. There are no offside rules. All 4 outfield players must wear eye shades or a blindfolder. The goalkeeper is sighted but cannot leave the area. There are 3 sighted guides that direct players to where the ball when it arrives in the third of the field. The guides are the goalkeeper in defense. The coach is midfield and another guide is in attack. The football contains bell ringing to allow competitors to hear its approach. If talking about football 7-a-side, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about for cerebral palsy athletes. All classifications involve ambulant athletes. C5. Athletes in these classifications have difficulty when walking or running, but not in standing or kicking the ball. Athletes will lose balance after a small shift in their central equilibrium. C6. These athletes have moderate to severe levels of athetosis, involuntary movements, ataxia, unsteadiness, or combination of athetosis and spasticity, muscle spasms, muscle spasms for all 4 limbs. Athletes in these classifications usually have problems controlling or coordinating their arms, particularly when running. C7 athletes in this class are hemiplegic. They have paralysis down one half of their body, including face, arm, and legs. These athletes usually walk with a limp and have an arm or hand flexes on the affected side of the body. The other side usually functions well. C8. This class consists of athletes with mild hemiplasia, diplasia, both arm or both legs, or athetosis or monoplasia, paralysis in one limb. Athletes must have an vision impairment that affects playing football. Teams must include at least one athlete from classes 5 or 6. Teams are not allowed to have more than 2 C8 players on the field. If talking about boccia, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes BC1. This category is for both throwers and foot players, those who kick the ball off the jack. Athletes can have help from an assistant who can hold the player's wheelchair steady or adjust it, and can give the ball to the player for the next attempt if the player asked for it. BC1 athletes have severe activity limitations affecting their legs, arm and trunk, and typically dependent on a powered wheelchair. BC2. This category is for throwing players only. No assistant can be given to players in this section of the competition. BC2 players have better trunk and arm function than those in class BC1. These abilities of the abilities of their arms and hands often allow them to throw the ball overhand and underhand and with a variety of grasps. BC3 class athletes have significant limitation in arm and leg functions and poor or no trunk control. They are unable to consistently grasp or release the ball and are unable to propel the ball consistently into the field of play and allowed it to use a ramp with the help of the sport assistant. BC3, this category is for players with a very advanced physical impairment. Players use a device to assist them and also can be helped by a nominated person at the court. However, the assistant must keep his or her back to the court. They cannot give advice on where to throw or kick the next ball to get it closest to the jack. BC4 class contains players with non-cerebral impairment that also impact their coordination. BC4, this category applies to people with other serious impairments not covered by the 3 other categories. Players are not allowed assistant. If talking about para-canoe, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes. The new Paralympic sport of canoeing involves competitors with physical impairment, groups into 3 sport classes. KL1 VL1 is for athletes who primarily propel with their arms only, with very limited or no trunk function or no leg function. KL1 athletes in this category have no trunk functions or very limited trunk functions and no leg functions. KL2 VL2 is for athletes who propel themselves with their arms and partial trunk and leg function. KL2 athletes in this category have partial legs and trunk function. They can sit upright in the kayak and will have limited leg movement while paddling in the race. KL3 VL3 is for athletes have full function of their arms and trunk and particular function in the legs. KL3 athletes with trunk function and particular leg function. Athletes in this category have connotations including muscular dystrophy, spina bifida, and tetraplegia. They use a double blades pedal to move forward in the water. If talking about paracycling, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. C1 athletes have the most serious impairment, which those in C5 have a lower level of impairment. T1 to T2 races for athletes on tricycles. They are unable to ride a bicycle due to the condition affecting balance and coordination. Athletes in T1 have a more serious impairment than those in the T2 category. Cerebral palsy, CP. These cyclists competed in 4 functional divisions. The athletes is only allowed to start in one division, and changing of divisions is not allowed. If talking about para-equestrian, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Grades 1A. These riders are mainly wheelchair users. They have poor trunk balance and or impaired function in all 4 limbs. Grade 1B. Some of these riders are wheelchair users. They have either reduced trunk control and minimal upper limb limitations, or moderate upper and lower limbs and trunk conditions. Grade 2. Some of these riders are wheelchair users. They have several movement impairment involving the lower half of and good trunk balance, or moderated impairments of all 4 limbs with reduced trunk control. Grade 3. Riders in this section are mainly able to walk without support. They have impairments in both arms or have no arms, or alternately having moderate impairment of all four limbs. Grade 3 also includes blind writers and those with short stature. Grade 4. These writers have more degree of visual impairments or reduced motion or reduced muscle strength or reduced legs function. If talking about goalball, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes. Goalball is played by visually impaired athletes. There is no formal classification since all participants wear blackout masks or blindfolds to ensure fairness. To be eligible, athletes have less than 10% visual acuity remaining or a visual field restricted to 40 degrees diameters. In order to ensure a fair competition between the teams, all players must wear eye shades or blindfolds during the game. Similar to five-a-side football, the ball has bell in it to orient players. There is total silence in the arena while ball is in play. If talking about para-judo, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes. To be eligible, athletes have less than 10% visual acuity remaining or a visual field restraining to 40 degrees diameters. A red circle on the sleeve of their judogi indicates that an athlete who is completely blind. Athletes competed in weight categories independent on their vision impairments. If talking about powerlifting, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. The competition is open to all athletes with cerebral palsy, spinal injury, and amputated lower limbs amputates only. Powerlifting is divided into 10 different weight divisions. The athletes who lift the greatest weight is the winner of each division. Orthopedic disability, cerebral palsy, neurological disability, evolutionary neurological disability, paraplegia and tetraplegia. Paraplegia and tetraplegia, also called quadriplegia, are two several forms of paralysis that can result from spinal cord injury. Paraplegia consisted of paralysis from the waist down, loss of feeling or movement in the legs, usually caused by an injury of the lower back. Tetraplegia is paralysis from the neck down, including the arms, legs, and body, resulting from neck injuries and physical exertion. exertion. Opened by weights and body categories, men competed in the up to 49 kg, 54 kg, 59 kg, 65 kg, 72 kg, 80 kg, 88 kg, 97 kg, 107 kg, and over 107 kg divisions. Women competed in the upper to 41 kg, 45 kg, 50 kg, 55 kg, 61 kg, 67 kg, 73 kg, 79 kg, 86 kg, and over 86 kg divisions. If talking about para rowing, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes. There are 3 classifications corresponding to the 3 Paralympic sport classes. LTA, leg, trunk, arm. These rowers included all competitors who have a minimum level of impairments, can include a visual impairment. They are able to use their legs, trunk, and arms to completely strokes. They are able to use a sliding seat in their boats. TA, trunk and arms. Competitors in these classifications can fix their pelvis on the seat in the boat but are unable to use the sliding seat because of their loss of leg functions. A. Arms only. These rowers have no legs or trunk functions and are only able to row with their using of their arms. PR1 is for rowers with minimal or no trunk functions who primarily propel the boat through arms and shoulder functions. These rowers have poor sitting balance, which requires them to be strapped to the boat seat. PR2 are rowers that have functional use of arms and trunk, but have weakness absence of leg functions to slide the seat. PR3 are rowers with residual function in their legs, which allows them to slide the seat. This class also includes athletes with vision impairments. If talking about parasailing, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Sailing has athletes from amputate, cerebral palsy, visual impaired, wheelchair and less arthritis groups competing against each other. Classifications is done on the points basis. There are 3 sailing classes: the sonar mixed 3-person crew, Scotch 18 2-person crew, and 3-4MR single-person events. The competitors are ranking between 1 and 7 points depending on their functional ability. 1 point rating is given to the lowest level of functions, while a 7 points rating is given to those with the highest level of functions. In 3-person boats, the total numbers of ratings points can be no higher than 14. In 2-person boats, one competitor has more severe level of impairment, while the other must have a minimum level of impairment. If talking about world shooting parasport, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Sport classes in shooting parasport. Competitors are divided into classes depending on their degree of trunk functionality, balance while sitting, muscle strength, and mobility of upper and lower limbs. SH1. This classification is for pistol and rifle competitors that do not require a shooting stand. SH2. This classification is for competitors who are unable to support a weight of the firearm with their arms. These competitors require a shooting stand. In shooting parasport, there are 7 different sport classes for athletes with either physical or visual impairments. The sport class profiles are set out in World Shooting Parasport classification rules and regulations. Sport classes SH1 Pistol. This sport class is designed for athletes with upper or lower limbs impairment for competition in pistol events. Sport class SH1 Rifle. This sport class is designed for athletes with lower limbs impairment for competition in rifle events. Sport class SH2 Rifle. This sport class is for rifle events only and is designed to athletes for upper limb impairment, which necessitates them to use a shooting stand to support the rifle. All or no in combination with lower limbs impairments. Sport class SGS Trap. Athletes with poor balance and or no trunk trunk stability competing from a wheelchair or sitting in a standing seated position. Athletes have an impairments in a lower limbs, but no functional limitation in their upper limbs. Sport class SGL Trap. Athletes with good balance and trunk function, competing from a standing position. Athletes have an impairment in the lower limbs, but no functional limitation in the upper limbs. Sport class SGU Trap. Athletes with good balance and trunk function, competing from a standing position. Athletes have an impairment in the non-shooting arm. Sport class SHV1 Rifle. This sport class is allocated for athletes with a vision impairment for competition in 10 meters rifle events. If talking about sitting volleyball, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes. Being unable to stand is not a requirement for playing sitting volleyball. There are two sport classes depending on the severity and impact on the core functions in sitting volleyball. VS1 and VS2 less impaired. Impairments can be either upper or lower limbs or both. Teams can have up to 2 VS2 on their roster. Volleyball at the Paralympics is open to athletes with physical impairments, including amputees. There are two classifications for athletes: MD, minimally disabled, and D, disabled. The game is played with 6 players on the court at a time. There can only be one MD athlete on court at any time per team. The rest must be D classification. If talking about para table tennis, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. There are 11 classes grouped as wheelchairs TT1 to 5, standing TT6 to 10, and intellectual impairment TT11. Table tennis has 11 different classifications relating to physical or intellectual impairments. 1 to 5, these classifications are for athletes in wheelchairs, with class 1 for the most severely impaired and class 5 for the lowest level of impairments. 6 to 10, these classifications are for those who competed while standing. Again, class 6 is for the most severely impaired and class 10 is for lowest level of impairments. 11, this class is for athletes with intellectual impairments. If talking about para taekwondo, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes competing in kyorugi will have the K prefixed. Classes competing in pomsai will have the P prefixed. The following sport classes are used for para taekwondo: kyorugi, physical impairments, K40, deaf, K60. Para taekwondo competes in 2 disciplines, kyorugi and pomsai. Classes competing in kyorugi will have the K prefixed. Classes competing in pomsai will have the prefixed P. The following classes are used for para taekwondo are kyorugi, physical impairments K40. K43 covers athletes with bilateral amputation below the elbow or corresponding loss of motor functions in both upper limbs. K44 covers the athletes with unilateral amputation of an arm or equivalence loss of motor function or loss of toes that affects the ability to raise the heel correctly. Deaf, K60. POMSI, visual impairments P10, intellectual impairments P20, neurological impairments P30, physical impairments P40, wheelchairs P50, deaf P60, dwarfism P670. At the Tokyo 2020 Paralympic Games, there will only have events for athletes with sport class K43 or K44. Combined event named K44. There will be 3 weight categories per gender. K43 includes athletes with bilateral amputation below the elbow or equivalent loss of function in the both upper limbs. K44 includes athletes with unilateral arms amputation or equivalent loss of functions or loss of toe, which impact the ability to lift the heel properly. If talking about para-triathlon, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Triathlon has 9 classes. PT, WC 1 to 2, athletes with limitations in the lower. PT, WC2, the upper limb and upper limbs. PT, WC1, using a hand cycle for the cycling segment and a racing chair for the running segment. PT 2 to 5, athletes with limitation in lower and or upper limbs. Lower class numbers means there is more limitations. Who competed in regular cycling and running. Assistive devices such as prosthetic legs or biking modifications are regulated by the IF. PTVE 1 to 3, athletes with visual impairments, subdivided in 3 classes by severity of vision loss: visual acutive or visual fields. Athletes in the PTWC and PTVE classes competed in combined events with the internal start system per sport class. If talking about wheelchair basketball, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. In wheelchair basketball, players are classified on the points system from 1 to 4.5 to find out which disability category they should be in. While most athletes have normal arms and hands functions, the main difference between classes are trunk control and sitting balance, which impact the rise of the player to catch and pass the ball. Lower numbers mean more restrictions. A team is composed of 5 players, and some points must be 14 or less. If talking about wheelchair fencing, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. All wheelchair fencers have an impairment of their legs or feet or competed in wheelchairs. Classes. Fencers in Category A have good trunk control, whereas Category B athletes have an impairment that impacts their trunks or their fencing arm. Fencing at the Paralympics is open to amputees, cerebral palsy, and wheelchair athletes. To level the playing field, all must compete in a wheelchair, which must be fastened to the floor at the angle of 110 degrees, which puts both competitors' fencing arms level with each other. The fastening to the floor means that they cannot backpedal away from lunge or attack from their opponents. From the other person who is fencing against you. Category 1A. Competitors unable to balance in the wheelchair and having a disability that prevents extension of the elbow of the short arm. Category 1B. Competitors unable to balance in the wheelchair and having a disability that inhibits finger movements of the short arm. Category 2. Competitors able to balance in the wheelchair. Category 3. Competitors able to balance in the wheelchair but unable to use legs for assistance. Category 4. Competitors able to balance in the wheelchair and to use leg for assistance. If talking about wheelchair rugby, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Wheelchair rugby players are classified on the point system from 1.5 to 3.5. Their points are allocation independent on restrictions in restriction in arms and trunk function that impact wheelchair rugby skills such as ball handling, catching, passing, carrying the ball, and wheelchair maneuverability, start, stop, turn, tackling, and blocking opponents or the guys that you are playing against. The team is composed of 5 players and the sum of points must be 8 or less. If talking about wheelchair tennis, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. There are 2 sport classes in wheelchair tennis. Classes. The open class is for athletes with permanent impairment of one or both legs, but with normal arms function. The quack class is for athletes with additional restrictions in playing arms, which limits the ability to handle the rackets and Mano Innri, the Innri, the wheelchair. Now we are going to talk about winter sport. If talking about para-alpine skiing, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Sport classes in para-alpine skiing. Athletes in para-alpine skiing are grouped into a following sport classes. The sport class profiles are set out in World Para-Alpine Skiing Classifications Rules and Regulations. Sport classes LW1 to 9 standing skiers. Lower limb impairments. Sport class LW1 athletes have an impairment in both legs. Sport classes LW2 athletes have a impairment in one leg. Sport class LW3 athletes having a impairment in both legs. Sport classes LW4 athletes having a impairment in one leg. Upper limb impairments. Sport classes LW5 to 7 athletes have an impairment in both arms and competed without skiing poles. Sport classes LW6 to 8 athletes with an impairment in one arm and competed with one ski pole. Combined upper and lower limb impairments. Sport classes LW9 skiers in this sport class have an impairment that affects arms and legs. Depending on the nature and degree of their activity limitation, they compete with or two skis and one or two poles. With two ski or one ski poles. That what I was meaning to say. Ski class LW10 to 12 sitting skiers. Sport classes LW10 to 12 all sitting skiers have an impairment affecting their legs and competes in sitting position. Sport classes B1 to 3 skiers with vision impairment. Sport classes B1 to 3 athletes in these sport classes have visual impairment and meet the minimum impairment criterion of competes. Athletes with vision impairment ski with a guide who variably gives directions to the athlete. If talking about para-Nordic skiing, para-cross-country skiing, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Sport classes in para-Nordic skiing. Athletes in para-Nordic skiing are grouped into a following sport classes. The sport class profiles are set out in World Para-Nordic Skiing Classification Rules and Regulations. Sport classes LW2 to 9 standing skiers. Lower limbs impairments. Sport classes LW2 athletes have an impairment in one leg. Sport class LW3 athletes with an impairment in both legs. Sport class LW4 athletes having an impairment in one leg. Upper limb impairments. Sport class LW5 to 7 athletes have an impairment in both arms and competed without ski poles. Sport class LW6 athletes have an impairment in one arm and competed with one ski pole. Sport class LW8 athletes having an impairment in one arm and competed with one ski pole. Combined upper and lower limbs impairments. Class LW9 skiers in this sport class has an impairment that affects arms and legs. Depending on the nature and degrees of their activity limitations, they competed with one or two skis or one or two ski poles. Sport class LW10 to 12 sitting skiers. Sport classes LW10 to 12, all sit skiers have an impairments affecting their legs and competed in a sitting position. Sport classes B1 to 3, vision impairment. Sport classes B1 to 3, athletes in these sport classes have visual impairment. Athletes with vision impairment ski with a guide who verbal gives directions to the athlete. If talking about para ice hockey, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. The details of classification in para ice hockey are set out in the World Para Ice Hockey Classifications Rules and Regulations. Athletes must have one of the eligible impairments and meet the minimum impairments criteria for the sport set out in those rules in the order to be eligible to compete. In para ice hockey, there is only one sport class. All athletes in the sport class have an impairment in the lower part of the body. All players on the team must meet a minimum impairment criteria to compete in para ice hockey. If talking about para snowboard, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. The details of classification in para snowboard are set out in the World Para Snowboard Classifications Rules and Regulations. Athletes must have one of the eligible impairments and meet at minimum impairments criteria for the sport set out in those rules in order to be eligible to compete. Sport classes in para snowboard. Athletes in para snowboard are grouped into the following sport classes. The sport class profiles are set out in World Para Snowboarding classification rules and regulations. Sport classes SBLL1, athletes have an impairment in one or both legs. Sport class SBLL2, athletes having an impairment in one or both legs. Sport class SBUL, athletes having an impairment in one or both arms. If talking about wheelchair curling, then here are the classes that tells us what kind of disability we are talking about. Classes. In wheelchair curling, there is only one sport class. Athletes must have an impairment affecting their legs. Athletes must have limb deficiencies due to bilateral or unilateral amputation of lower limbs, muscle weakness in the legs due to spinal cord injury or impaired coordination due to cerebral palsy. All athletes must use a wheelchair in competition. Though not all athletes use a wheelchair in daily life, all wheelchair curlers must meet at minimum impairment criteria to compete. The sport is open to male and female athletes who have a physical impairment in the lower half of their body, including spinal cord injuries, cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, and double leg amputation. Teams are comprised of both men and women, and the sport is now practiced in 24 different countries. They sit in special chairs and throw the curls with the stick from the chair, but it is not known that this would be anything different from non-disciplinary curls. They can use a regular wheelchair, though they need to make sure wheels are clean before going on the ice. Some rinks even have their own one to borrow from those who does not use a wheelchair in everyday life, but would prefer a seated delivery position. Rinks and clubs will have the delivery sticks, so they just need warm clothes with layers. A lap belt can give added security and allow a greater range of movement. A stability grip can also help them as progress, but clubs will help them with this.
Thank you for listening to my show. I had lots of fun, and I thought it was very interesting what I was talking about in the show. I hope that you had lots of fun too. Listen to the show, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.